A Hamas official and spokesperson has vowed to repeat the events of October 7th, quote, again and again until all of Israel is annihilated. Let's watch.
انه صار لازم نأدبها وحنأدبها مره ثانيه وثالثه، ومش هذا حتكون طوفان الاقصى اول مره، لا حتكون ثانيه وثالثه ورابعه، لانه احنا لدينا اصرار ولدينا قرار ولدينا امكانيات ان نقاتل نعم. وان نحارب، لكن كما قلت لك بدنا ندفع ثمن. نعم احنا مستعدين، معلش بدي اقول لك بشكل واضح، احنا اسمنا شعب الشهداء وبنفخر ان نقدم شهداء، احنا لا نريد ان نمس لا بالمدنيين ولا ان نلحق الاذى بهم، لكن اوقات لانه في تعقيدات في الميدان صارت في منطقة موجودة، وكان هناك في احتفال وكان في سكان وفي منطقة واسعة ليست سهلة على امتداد تقريبا 40 كيلومتر. يجب أن ننتهي.
أن ينتهي وين؟ بقطاع غزة؟
ينتهي إلى لا بتكلم عن كل الأراضي الفلسطينية.
كل الأراضي الفلسطينية يعني طبعًا. زوال إسرائيل؟
طبعا. وجود إسرائيل غير منطقي. وجود إسرائيل هو اللي بخلق كل هذه الآلام والعذابات والدموع والدماء. هي إسرائيل مش احنا ضحية الاحتلال، نقطة واخر السطر. لذلك ما حدا يلومنا، احنا شو اللي بنعمله في 7 أكتوبر، في 10 أكتوبر، في مليون أكتوبر، احنا اللي بنعمله مبرر. It is justified، مبررة.
Last night, Kentucky Senator Lindsey Graham spoke with CNN's Abby Phillips on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Let's watch.
Civilian casualties.
Is there a threshold for you, and do you think there should be one for the United States government, at which the U.S. would say, let's hold off for a second in terms of civilian casualties? Is there a point at which you would start to question?
No, if somebody asked us after World War II, is there a limit what you would do to make sure that Japan and Germany don't conquer the world? Is there any limit what Israel should do to the people who are trying to slaughter the Jews? The answer is no. There is no limit, but here's what you need to do. Be smart. Let's try to limit civilian casualties the best we can. Let's put humanitarian aid in areas that protect the innocent. I'm all for that, but this idea that Israel has to apologize for attacking Hamas, who's embedded with their own population, needs to stop. The goal is to destroy Hamas. Hamas is creating these casualties, not Israel.
I don't think anyone's
civilian casualties.
Is there a threshold?
This comes as we are now learning that the Jabalia refugee camp near Gaza City has been bombed yet again. Dr. Shrita Parsi points out on X, says there was no condemnation by Biden, let alone any meaningful pressure by the U.S. on Israel to stop these atrocities. After Israel bombed a refugee camp yesterday, Israel went ahead and bombed that same refugee camp again today.
Yeah, I mean, something that strikes me as I listen to both those statements from the Hamas spokesperson and Lindsey Graham, so there's a weird parallelism between the two of them. Both are saying that there is no limit to the extremities that they'll go to establish certain conditions. For Lindsey Graham, it's a return to the status quo before October 7th and the elimination of Hamas. For the Palestinians, it's the elimination of the apartheid conditions and the occupation that they've been living under for 75 years. And while it is common, we've heard it from Anthony Blinken, we've heard it from Joe Biden, we've heard it from the entire Republican and Democratic establishment, basically, that Israel has a right to defend itself, which means killing any number of civilians. Lindsey Graham seemed to want to make this comparison to World War II. We've been hearing a lot, where there is no limit to how many civilians should be killed to stop the Nazis and the Axis powers. But it does seem like there's a gap there, which is, are the civilians you're killing actually well tailored to ending the war? And that's the question, whether or not the largely indiscriminate bombing that's happening in Gaza is tethered to the desired outcome of getting rid of Hamas. Is it just creating more future fighters, whatever political banner they fall under, who are still going to want to achieve the same goal, which is liberation for themselves and their people and getting out of what has been described by 18 humanitarian groups and all of that as an open-air prison? And so in some perverse way, they're after the same goal of root resolution of the conflict, but for Lindsey Graham, it's not the same root goal. It's different root goals. That's the problem. For Lindsey Graham, a return to October 6th is sufficient. And for Palestinians, they're articulating that it's never going to end until there is a meaningful equality for their people across all of the Palestinian.
Well, I don't know that that's what the Hamas spokesperson was saying there. I mean, first on the Lindsey Graham side, Lindsey Graham is the most hawkish voice in all of American politics. He wants war with Iran. He is, I'm not going to say exactly an outlier, but he is very much the neoconservative and then some. He doesn't represent my part of the conservative movement. He's come under a lot of criticism from people like Tucker Carlson and others. Despite him being like an ally of Donald Trump on like a personal level, he wants the most muscular and interventionist foreign policy possible. So I absolutely disagree with him on basically his whole entire foreign policy worldview and what he said there. But I mean, what Hamas is saying is, what that spokesperson is saying is that they will continue the terrorist attacks until there is no Israel, until all of the Israelis are driven from the land. It's not just equality for the Palestinian people, which can and should be worked out. And this is why peace seems so elusive, because you're negotiating with an organization that, by their own admission, is not interested in Palestine and Israel existing side by side or together or in any format, but Israel must go away, which is never going to happen.
It's not in any format. The argument is against the logic of Israel in the eyes of Palestinians is to have a state that establishes an ethnicity supremacy, Jewish supremacy, a Jewish state, an ethno-nationalist state in the middle of an Arab world, where because of the population realities of the state, you cannot maintain that demographic majority in a voting sense without targeting and excluding people on the basis of their race/religion. That's the conflict. So the idea is that before Israel was established in 1948, there were Christians and Jews and Muslims, Arab Christians, Arab people of all different ethnicities living in this location as they had for thousands of years. And the policies of Israel, the choice to enclose Gaza and restrict movement and barricade its waterways, not allowed to have an airport, not allowed to have its own economies, having 40% unemployment or whatever it was before the crisis emerged on the 7th, is all part and parcel of maintaining a demographic reality in Israel, and the same with the encroaching settlements, the illegal settlements that have been condemned by the international community and our own government, in which the country Israel prioritizes and incentivizes settlers to encroach and build houses, enact violence on the Palestinian population in the West Bank, so that it's less and less likely that that contiguous piece of Palestinian land can ever stand alone as a Palestinian state.
Let me try this again. You've criticized rightly, I think, over and over again, the bloodthirsty statements made by Israeli actors and some of their supporters in U.S. government and media for not properly, and I don't disagree with you, for not properly weighing the need to protect civilians. On the other side, here is Hamas saying we will over and over again deliberately we will kill as many civilians as we've killed on October 7th again and again and again until there is no state of Israel. I mean, isn't that as bloodthirsty and unrealistic and counterproductive and anti-humanitarian as anything on the other side?
Oh, it is bloodthirsty, but the difference is that my tax dollar, he doesn't represent me. Anthony Blinken does.
Right.
Our UN representative, Linda Thomas Greenfield does. So my tone and the kind of weight of my criticisms are heavier there because they directly implicate me. I don't have
that's the root of some of our disagreements. I don't have any designs
on Hamas. I can say that's very bad, don't kill civilians, but that kind of has nothing to do with me. But if I do want the civilians to stop being killed, I'm not going to be indifferent to the underlying cause there, the people of Palestine, and Hamas is the elected government in Gaza. That this is an expression of a political agenda that I very much do agree with, which is the liberation of the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine, generally speaking. And it should be noted that this conflict did not start on October 7th. There was the Great March of Return in 2018, which was the last major nonviolent effort for Palestinians to advocate for their own liberation. They marched in scads to the walls that enclosed them in this open-air prison, and IDF soldiers stood at the top of those walls for days and weeks, shooting at protesters, killing over 100 and injuring so many that there are scores of people who walk around either amputees or permanently disabled because they were shooting at their knees and legs as part of their in the midst of this peaceful protest. So at the end of the day, of course, Palestinians, I mean, would you be satisfied for your family and your heirs and your grandchildren and their great-great-grandchildren to live in an open-air prison where they drink polluted water and they aren't able to access medical conditions? They're not able to leave. They don't have an airport. They're not even able to fish in their own sea. Foreign countries have designs on oil wells off their coast.
I want those circumstances alleviated for them. But what is neither justifiable nor helpful for fixing the situation is the widespread slaughter of innocents on the other side, the taking of prisoners, and then the promise to do this again and again and again. What it's going to produce and is already producing is just widespread death and destruction in Gaza. That's the immediate effect, is thousands of deaths.
I did think it was interesting, and you obviously have to take everything with a grain of salt, but I did think it was interesting to hear him say that they had military targets in Israel and that coming across that festival was not part of the plan. This has been described as a targeted, the events of October 7th have been widely described as a targeted attack on civilians, even as it's been widely reported that the festival's location changed last minute. And that does seem to be like a true fact on the ground, that nobody knew that the festival was going to be there until the last minute. So whatever planning was done by Hamas to address any military targets were kind of thwarted by the reality of this music festival happening in the middle of this space so close to this concentration camp. Some people have objected to it being called an open-air prison because, of course, nobody was tried and convicted and thrown in there because of any wrongdoing. So, that's that. And it does seem to suggest there was some knowledge either because of PR or because of some sense of personal ethics. They didn't actually want to target civilians. But as I've made the point on this show before, occupied peoples do have a right to resist, and they do have a right to do so using violence and force and militarily. And Hamas is the military political representative of Palestine. And yes, they are going to keep fighting for their freedom.
The Palestinian people are governed by a dictatorship that hasn't held
free elections.
Had elections. Most of them haven't had no opportunity. You've pointed that out before as a reason to deny the legitimacy of. I use that to deny the legitimacy of Hamas's stewardship of Gaza. It is not done they've not had a vote to see if it reflects the will and the consent of the people.
That's true. And even when Hamas was elected, it was with less than 50% of the vote at the time. But there was, there were multiple parties at play, so they were still able to win. But this is also the only representation that there is, and they have. So, I don't know. People do have the right to resist.
I mean, you keep saying that, but if resistance takes the form of the murder and kidnapping of non-combatants, they don't. I mean, if whoever's giving them the right to do that, I disagree with. I do not think you should have the right to do that.
Law. And look, you can resist.
Well, that's not part of international law.
No, the resistance is part of international law. The killing of civilians
international law sanctions hostage taking.
Well, no, but also international law doesn't sanction the thousands of Palestinians that are kept without a trial.
But does it make it, because they did something wrong, now you can do hostage taking?
No, let me just finish the sentence, though. International law also doesn't sanction the thousands of Palestinian prisoners that are kept in Israel, and that's part of what the negotiation is about. So, yeah, Israel isn't allowed to do by international law to kill 8,000 civilians, 70% of which are women and children. It isn't allowed to bomb hospitals. It isn't allowed to bomb schools. It isn't allowed to bomb churches, but here we are. So it is very interesting to me that there is this asymmetry. I would agree that neither side should be doing any of those things. But the United States...
Fine. We can just stop there. Neither side should be doing these things.
Well, I have a little bit more to say, though. The United States is standing by Israel as it does exactly that with our tax dollars and with our stated support. There's not a single senator in the United States of America, from Bernie Sanders to, I don't know, who's the most right-wing senator you can think of, who will support a ceasefire. And that is what my government is backing, and that is what my government is behind, and that's what the international community is trying to push back against. And it seems to me, in the interest of these 19, 20, 21-year-old Israeli soldiers that just died earlier this week in the ground incursion, and the interest of the 1,400 Israelis that died on October 7th, and the interest of the 8,000 Palestinians that have died over the last 3 weeks, and the hundreds and thousands more Palestinians that have died and suffered over the last 75 years. If people are really interested in ending the cycle of violence, what we just saw between the Lindsey Graham quote and the Hamas quote is an illustration of how the cycle of violence works, then you have to be serious about committing in a way that Bibi Netanyahu, who never has been, but committing to a real resolution for what it means to free Palestinians.
Right. I mean, neither side, unfortunately, is interested in a sustained end to the violence. And I think you speak to... No, I think that's quite obviously true. We just played the clips, and
Hamas's
Israel
own charter supports a two-state solution at this point.
I mean, that's not what the spokesperson just said. The spokesperson just said no to a two-state solution.
No,
he said no Israel.
He didn't say they no to a two-state solution, and people really have to internalize.
He said there will be widespread death and destruction until there's no Israel.
People have to really internalize. Israel is an apartheid state. When people are talking about, when the Muslim community, when Arab communities are talking about an end to an Israel, they mean an end to a state, just like South Africa. Ending in apartheid didn't mean that South Africa literally stopped existing off the map, or that every white South African was banished from the country or murdered in their homes. What it meant was an end to a system, a state that established one race in the case of South Africa, or one religious group in the case of Israel, as superior to all the rest in the eyes of the law. That's what they want an end to. And that is what Israel is. It has established itself definitionally as an ethno-nationalist state. So I don't know. Can you have an Israel with a religious symbol on its flag and all of that it means, as with the right of return in a Jewish homeland, at the same time, in any way that resembles what it is, while stripping out the ethno-nationalist part of it? I think that's impossible, and that's what people are talking about when they say that Israel in its current form has ceased to exist. And I don't think it's really helpful or constructive to skew every statement of that kind into, this means we have to murder all of the Israelis. Of course, that would be unconscionable. Nobody should support anything like that. But the question is the only alternative to that is supporting an ethno-nationalist state? It's a tough question. It's one that a lot of people are grappling with right now, but I do think that's what's on the table.
We'll have more Rising right after this.